Okie dokie. I'm going to get started. The first thing I'm going to say is thank you all so very much for coming here. I actually didn't want to go to this talk. I wanted to go to the cybersecurity one, and I'm annoyed that they scheduled me at the same time, but it's okay. The fact that you guys are all here is really cool. I was not expecting this kind of turnout, so thank you. Before I start, just want to say it's going to be pretty casual presentation, not so much a lecture, more so me just kind of telling you a story that happened to me. So if you have questions in the middle, feel free to raise your hand, but there'll also be a section for questions at the end. Sound good? Cool. So let's start with who am I? Pretty simple. My name's Ian. I work in Hale Library here at K-State, and when the servers at Hale Library at K-State fail, it's my problem, and I have to go fix them. So as a part of that, I'm on a lot of different groups and committees and organizations. I'm kind of like IT liaison to a handful of different groups. And kind of through that role, just through bending a few people's ears, I'm going to move this real quick. One sec. This is going to go here. There's starting to be a lot of talk in the library about AI. You know, AI, it's pretty cool. You might have heard of it. There's this group called the AI Librarians. They consider themselves to be sort of the bleeding edge of AI research, at least in the library. And we also have the Sunderland Innovation Lab, Jeff from Sunderland Innovation Lab here. They do a lot of stuff. They do 3D printers and all that sort of stuff, but they have these machines that are designed to be workstations if you're learning about AI. And so it was actually my responsibility when I came on, that project had kind of fallen behind a little. And so I kind of brought that up to speed with our sort of Ansible install and got the AI stuff working there consistently across a handful of these. They're think stations. They're just sort of high-powered workstations. And we got to a conversation at one point in one of our staff meetings about how students are kind of already using ChatGPT. So it would behoove us to have some sort of familiarity with those tools and how they work so that we could meet our students and our patrons where they are and help them with what they need. And so that was all kind of a conversation. People were like, oh, it'd be cool if we had an AI. And then people started looking at me because they're like, hey, he does the AI stuff for Sunderland, right? Can Ian do that? And then it landed on my desk. They're like, hey, we want you to like actually set up a large language model. So a ChatGPT AI, not necessarily image generation or anything like that, just specifically chatbot. We want one of those. Can you look into that? And I was like, yeah, sure. Hey, Google, how do I run my own AI? I have no idea. This step, it's going to be one slide. This was like 2.5 weeks worth of work. Because let me tell you, one, it's changing literally every day. So whatever the best recommendation is not going to be the best recommendation tomorrow. And two, there's just a lot of junk out there. There's a lot of people just trying to sell you something. And we specifically at the library almost exclusively use open source software that we run ourselves. We have vendors, but we're never going to pay like proprietarily for a piece of software. That's just not how we roll. So we needed to find out, how do you do this like actually on a server somewhere that I'm running? I'm not paying for an API or something like that. So 2 weeks of Googling, and I find out that it's actually, when you abstract it all away, it's pretty simple. That's what makes abstraction so great. The only thing you need is a model and a compatible client. It's just that simple, folks. You need an AI model and you need a client that works with that model. What does that mean? So a large language model is basically a whole bunch of pattern recognition compiled down into a very dense state. So you start with this giant set of regular text, right? So these could be English language books. This could be chat history between users and technical support, anything you want. And you run it through some form of algorithm. There are lots of different kinds of algorithms, purported by lots of different companies, but that will condense down into a model, which will usually be in like a .tf TensorFlow format, or there's another one that's escaping me right now, but it's like Python specific. Some of them use JSON. They'll be compiled down into one large file. And then once you have that, you should be able to just plug that file into a client. And that client will have a text prompt, and you can type in the chat, and it'll spit out a response. And a thing to keep in mind is that the technology that we're talking about, actually, if you watch the keynote, he did a way better job of explaining this than me. But the technology we're talking about here is very basically like next word text prediction. So like this is a pretty old screenshot of an iPhone. The keyboard doesn't look like that anymore. But it's the same idea, even as far back as that, of we're just looking at the text and we're guessing what the next word should be. So that's models. Now, how do we talk about compatible clients, right? So when you have your weights compiled down into effectively like a blueprint, the client is the thing that's going to look through the blueprint and actually do the work of like parsing through the binary tree that the blueprint has created and predict what the next response is going to be and actually print that to your screen. So there's lots of different large language models, and all of them are formatted slightly different. So like Llama is Facebook's, Quent is a more recent open source one, Orca is Microsoft, Vicuna is based off of Llama from the people from Stanford. Alpaca is also based off of Llama, Mixtral, and you see it goes off the bottom of the screen there. There are so many different formats of model. And all of them come with their own little quirks. So that's just something to keep in mind. But supposedly, if you have a client that's compatible with that model, you should be able to just plug them together and run it. That's sort of interesting in theory, but let's talk about like how would you actually do that? So where do you go to get a large language model? So thankfully, there's one answer for that. The website is called huggingface.co. Has anyone, show of hands, know what that is? Cool. It's fairly well known. You can go to, they have a section that'll say text generation models. And this is, when I last checked, it had nearly 100,000 models. So you can just go and download literally any one of those that you want. They're all free. And yeah, basically we're spoiled for choice when it comes to models. There's going to be differences in what they're sort of focusing on. But generally speaking, they're all just going to be question response models that, yeah, they're all just going to be question response models. Past that, you get to clients, and clients are a bit trickier. So here's where we kind of get into the first, I guess, what's the good word for it? The first sort of separation between what the customer expects and what they say and what I am able to provide them. So the customer comes up to me and says, I want a thing like ChatGPT. And so I Google like, well, how do I run my own AI? And the most common response are like, well, here are some command line utilities you can use. You can download this client or this model, you point this command line utility at it, input, output, right? That's not acceptable to them. I can't tell these non-technical users, oh yeah, so just go to GitHub and download and compile this thing and then also get this LLM. That's not what they're gonna be able to, they're not gonna be able to use that. They're expecting ChatGPT. They're expecting a website because that's what they think when they say AI. They don't even realize that an AI is a client and a model. They just think AI is a website that I go and I type into. So we're sort of needing to meet those expectations as best we can, while still maintaining our costs and our requirements of doing stuff completely open source. So our requirements really are, we need it to have a web interface. It needs to support graphics cards. It can't just run on the CPU. It's not going to have the performance you want if you run it on a CPU. And it needs to be scalable. And as it turns out, that's a really tricky thing to find out or to find. So some clients, if you Google, again, you just Google large language model client, most of the time what you're going to get are libraries. So Hugging Face has a library called Transformers. That's a Python library, which will allow you to write your own sort of client, right? So it'll do all the hard backend stuff. It's just a function call in Python. And you can write whatever you want. You can write the web interface or something like that. LangChain is a sort of agnostic one as well. It has versions for Rust and Go and Node.js and Python. But all of those are expecting you to write your own web interface, write your own UI, your own client, your own API. And that's a possibility for some people, but it's simply not a possibility for our team. We have like 3 people in the department, and none of us are particularly good developers. We're more like system administrators. So, in theory, we could set something up like that, but that's going to introduce more costs down the line to like maintain, and also like writing documentation, and people are going to have feature requests, and that's a headache that we don't want to mess with. Like I said before, some will do what we want. They'll be GPU supported, but they'll only run locally. So again, if you Google this, GPT for all is probably what's going to come up first. That's just a desktop application. Again, it has a GUI, but that's about it. You can't, it's not going to work via the web. And that's like a really core piece for these people. We actually experimented for a little bit about maybe like setting up like a Windows desktop to actually run it, and then do some funkiness with like iframes or something like that. Or no, bad idea. Don't do that. Waste of a week and a half. GPT for all and Lobe Chat, again, are good options if you want to do it on your local machine, but not so much if you're actually wanting to run a server for that. And then we did find one that met all of our criteria. It's called Text Generation Web UI, although no one calls it that because that's too long and wordy. They just call it the name of the lead developer, which is Uba Booga, which is like, I guess, like a caveman sound. That's what this weird frog man is here. That's his profile picture. That's a really nice tool. It has a web interface, graphics card supported, but it's not exactly scalable. It's a sort of monolithic architecture. So if we wanted to, and it doesn't have per GPU multi-threading. So you can do one request per GPU at a time. So if two people wanted to be making chats at the same time, you need two GPUs. And so for a while there, that's what we thought we were going to be stuck with. And so we ended up speccing out what it would cost to build a server. So, I just set this up on one of our desktops we had that had a graphics card in it. And ran some back of the napkin math, like, well, this graphics card costs this much. It can run this many users. We're going to need a server with like 30 or 40 pretty decent graphics cards at this point. And I'm going to go ahead and that was kind of the end of the road for a while there. What our conclusion was that, okay, LLMs are easy to come by. We can't really get clients that meet our criteria. The one that's closest is going to cost us like $100,000. And if you know about our budgets, that's not the kind of budget we have. And so we thought we were down and out for a while until we came across a little group called LMSys. So this is just their about page here. But it stands for Large Model Systems Organization, and they are a research group from UC Berkeley. And I got to say, these people are doing some really incredible work. And if it weren't for them, this project would not have happened. We would have gotten stuck and said, it costs too much, we can't do it anymore. So the two things that we got from LMSys was, one, their model that they use called Vicuna, which is built on Llama, and two, their client, which is called FastChat. So the cool thing about FastChat is it's distributed. It's not a monolithic tool. So instead of having your front end and your sort of graphics cards all needing to be in the same machine, you can have workers who actually have the graphics cards in them and do the difficult part of actually computing, the response to the chat. Don't worry about understanding this diagram, by the way. The next one's going to make a lot more sense. You can have basically split it out into different controllers, front ends and workers. And so once we found out about that, our gears started turning a little bit and started thinking, well, if we don't need one machine with a lot of graphics cards, we just need a lot of machines with one graphics card. Well, hey, hold on. We have this computer lab 2 floors down that like people don't use very often. And each one of them have a nice graphics card in them. And with just a little bit of work, we can like turn that lab into a server farm effectively. And so that solved our price issue. So if you can think to yourself like, oh, well, I have this lab in my department that I maintain with a bunch of graphics cards sitting around like that, this could very well work for you as well. And yeah, I'm going to go on to the next slide, actually. So just a bit of an explanation. I hope you can see that. So this is roughly how it works. So you'll start with a user out on the internet. And they will access our web UI, which runs on an EC2 instance in AWS. So that's just, the web UI is just like an HTML form. I think it's written in Node.js, but it's just HTML with like the chat interface. And so a user types into the chat, and when they hit enter, all the front end does is take their chat and pass it along. Where's my mouse? Pass it along to the controller. And the controller has a list of all of the workers. So the controller receives a request, says, here are all the workers that currently exist. This worker doesn't have any queued jobs. I'm going to pass that to that individual worker. This is all happening over HTTP. We're doing reverse proxies to get HTTPS, but it's not like a custom protocol. It's very simple. Your firewalls probably have holes poked for this already. So the controller picks one effectively at random, and it sends it directly to our desktops in the innovation lab. So our campus, your campus may not have this set up, but our campus has a thing called Direct Connect set up in our AWS cloud, which basically means if we have a private IP in AWS, that is the same as a private IP on campus. So we don't need to do any like in Grok or weird like proxying or anything like that, you may need to if you don't have this set up. But we have all that proxying and tunneling set up for us already. So it sends this request with the content of your chat to one of the workers. The worker has the model downloaded onto it. It does the actual hard part of reading your chat, parsing through the blueprint, and making response. And then once it's done, it passes that directly back to the controller, which is keeping track of like, oh, well, this socket connected to this machine is associated with this user session on the front end. So it knows how to route it back to the front end, and then the front end renders it to the user. The only step I'm skipping here is when you bring a worker online, it needs to be able to communicate to the controller so that it can register and say, hi, I'm a worker. This is my IP address. This is the port I'm running on. And that's the way that the controller knows where it is. If that's not happening, oh, and it also sends a heartbeat every like 10 or 30 seconds. You can configure it. But if that step misses, then the controller is not going to know where that desktop is, and it's just going to be sitting there, or that worker is, and it's just going to be sitting there doing nothing. Oh, wow. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. So to speak very briefly, I'm not going to give a step-by-step instruction on how to do this, but like to set this up is actually quite simple. So show of hands, anybody here use Ansible or familiar with Ansible? No. Chef, Puppet, Salts, cool. SCCM, group policies. Okay. Please nod your head anyways to make me feel better. I'm joking. I'm joking. Okay, so Ansible is a remote configuration tool for Linux. Basically, I can tell it a bunch of commands, I can press a button, and it'll run those commands on every machine in my entire fleet at once, and I don't have to do that by hand. So my Ansible, roughly, to install for one of these desktops is to log in, create a service account user, make sure Python's installed, use pip to download the latest version of FastChat, and then I just copy over a systemd file that says, you know, /fastchat, and then it has a bunch of command line parameters that I can configure, again, through Ansible. These are just environment variables on my host machine. I can configure it to say, you know, specifically use this model, and I can also configure it. This is the really nice thing. Because remember, we're sharing compute cycles with the Sunderland lab. Like someone might be sitting at that machine and using it for valid reasons. So FastChat has a built-in functionality to let you say, use no more than 50% of CPU, use no more than 25% of system memory, that sort of thing. But also, if you really want to get into it, so you can't do that, it doesn't support that with GPU usage computation percentage, but you can actually do that through C groups, if you know what you're talking about. So basically, I have it limited to, it will never use more than 50% of the active resources on that machine. Yeah, so that's roughly what the installation process is like. The controller and the front end are pretty simple. It's mostly just like install systemd file. And then the main thing is making sure that all of these components, the controller, the front end, and the desktops have the right IP addresses and are pointing at each other. And as long as they're pointing at the right IP addresses and those ports are open to the firewall, it should just work. Oh yeah, and actually no, I have a slide for this later. So that's how you do it. You've got a few things to keep in mind. Like I mentioned, this setup requires you to share compute cycles. So make sure whoever you're sharing compute cycles with is aware of that, and they're okay with that, obviously. Again, I kind of mentioned this before. The whole field so far is extremely young. So anticipate that whatever you install, whatever model or driver or whatever, in 3 weeks, it's probably going to be out of date. You either need to get really good about checking those every day, or just sort of have the mental acceptance that I'm not going to be the most up to date. I'm going to be a slightly less cutting edge AI. That's okay. FastChat is maintained mostly by students, mostly graduate students in UC Berkeley. They have very different priorities from as a student who's researching AI from me as a sysadmin who's trying to run this AI. So I have a lot of GitHub issues being like, hey, it'd be really cool if I could just configure this in a config file and not have to re-edit my systemd file every time I wanted to change how much memory it uses. And that's been sitting on red for like months and months now. And that's okay. Like I could make that change if I wanted to. It's a fairly straightforward code base. I feel like I understand it well enough that I could do something like that. It's just not been a priority or I've had the time. But just recognize that that might not be the sort of customer service you're used to for a lot of things like this. And this is all to say nothing of training an AI. This is exclusively running an AI. So when I showed this to the people at the library, they were all like, great, well, can we train it on the library's AI? And like, cool, I need another 3 months to Google how do you train an AI, not how do you run an AI. Those verbs are very different. So just, again, keep that in mind. Just a little tip, probably a smart idea. So if I go back a slide. So here in this diagram, I have the web UI and the controller as different machines. Probably would have been smart to do that. I have them running on the same machine with different vhosts, and Apache reverse proxies are handling that. Super convenient, except for the fact that your controller and your desktops or your workers need to have their firewalls locked down pretty hard, because let's say you're running a web front end that you have authentication on, right? If you don't have authentication on the controller, anyone can just spin up their own web front end and connect it to your controller if they know where it is, and they'll be using your same resources. Or they can spin up their own controller and point it at your desktops and say, hey, actually the IP address has moved, I'm over here now. With like the workstations, I'm able to do that firewall rules. Because these are happening at the same machine, instead of being able to do it with firewall rules, I have to do it with like Apache require denies, which is not the most efficient way to do that. That's easier to get DDoS, blah, blah, blah. So just word to the wise, maybe put them on 2 different machines. That would make your life a little easier. And you should really plan for how you want to handle logs. Because one of the things that we heard from a lot from our feedback was the reason why people in the library wanted this was because they were not happy with the idea of their data going out to ChatGPT or going out to, Bard or Gemini or whatever. And they're like, we want this in the library and we want this to be as anonymous as possible. The thing, again, kind of going back to the priorities of the developers of FastChat, they log everything because they're basically all on like debug info mode. And so every step of the way will log all the information it has. So all the chat data is logged into 3 different places. And we were telling people, like, we're going to go through the trouble to make sure your chat data is never logged anywhere. So it's one thing to say, like, in a config file, put it in, like, pipe your error logs to dev null. It's another thing to say, oh, well, this is undocumented, but we're at whatever directory the binary exists in, it's going to start just writing files there. So we have to like make symlinks to dev null that are called the name of the file that it's already looking for. It's kind of a mess. So just keep in mind that that's kind of a hassle. And if that's something you have to deal with if you're worried about, privacy. If you're not so worried about that, pretend I didn't just talk for the last 40 seconds and we can keep on going. And then the one last thing to keep in mind, again, I said this before, but I really want to reiterate, it is just predictive text. The AI knows literally nothing. So here's the example that I really like. So I said, could you link me some papers that have come out in the last 5 years about encryption? None of these papers are real. They are all made up. In fact, this is my favorite. So post-quantum cryptography, current status and future directions. If you put that into Google Scholar, the first 5 or 6 articles all have the word post-quantum in it. It's realized that's a thing that's very popularly in articles about encryption, but it has no idea about what like articles actually are or how they if they actually exist. So again, just the thing to keep in mind. There are things that it's a tool, right? There are things it's good at and the things it's not good at. I gotta be honest with you, I haven't written a regex in like 6 months because FastChat is so good at saying like, oh, I want a regex that'll isolate an IP address. Boom, 5 seconds, done. Or like, hey, how do I open a file in Python? I forgot. And then it'll get me instantly. But like this kind of, just use it with your best caution and don't take everything it says at face value. So that's now for the last minute twist. You guys can actually go access this right now if you want. It's at https://fastchat.ksulib.net. The campus IP addresses have been whitelisted for the single sign-on, so you can do it without single sign-on. Use it, tell me how you like it. And then I have questions, but first, a comment. If anybody knows where the after party is tonight, let me know, because I haven't heard yet. And then there's another thing that I forgot about, so I'm just going to go with questions. Yes?
What are you using it for?
Me personally? So for the library in general, the sort of stated goal was that we're still technically this is still technically like a test to see if we want to continue with this project. But So for me personally, again, I use it before I use Google when I have technical problems. Like, how do I do this in Ansible? How do I do this in Python? Blah, blah, blah. That's for me. Most of the people in the library are using it to become more familiar with sort of the follies of AI, so that when students come to them and say like, oh, well, just become more familiar with AI just in general, so that when students come to them and have questions that involve AI, they have something that they can go and work on and use. Yeah. Question.
What did you train the data?
I didn't train anything. So Hugging Face is pre-trained, pre-compiled. So you can think of the models you get from Hugging Face as the sort of, it's like a compiled binary. It's already been compiled. You don't have to deal with that anymore.
Follow-up question. I would guess that they wanted to have some of their own resources added.
Yeah.
Has that happened?
So there is a method through which you can sort of postemptively add some additional data. They're called LoRa's, low something ranking something. And we're looking into that now, but it's only ever going to have minor effects. It's not going to be a sort of monumental shift. And so it's sort of a question now with the stakeholders whether they'd like me to spend my time focusing on those or spend a little bit more time and learn how to compile one from the very, very scratch. So that's still kind of up in the air right now. Yes.
When you're Googling and searching this, what kind of resources are the most helpful on blogs and forums, or?
That's a really tough question. So I mean, I'm gonna give you the answer everyone gives. You put Reddit at the end, right?
That's the AI.
But I think, sorry? Yeah, okay. Actually, people have joked about this. It's actually really bad about, it'll tell you like, oh, Gemini belongs to Google, but it doesn't know anything about how to actually run one. Honestly, what I found was a lot of just digging through. So I would find like, I would go to GitHub and I would search like AI, client or whatever, and I would just click on the first one and I would find as many keywords as I could, right? So this is supports llama. What's llama? Put that in a list, right? Read through the README, try and compile it and run it. The first 4 or 5 you do, they're not even going to compile. It's not even going to work. But you're going to see those errors and you're going to see those. It's a very active experience, I'd say. It's not, you can't really learn it just from Googling. I could talk about this for ages, but like get into it and start experimenting with it, find where the errors are. And then through like looking up responses to errors, you'll see common mistakes that people make. And they'll say like, oh, well, you're using a 4-bit quantization. That's an additional flag. You should know that because it says B4 in the LLM name, but like no one tells you that sort of thing. So you just kind of got to get into it. It's similar to if you've ever been into like using like Make to compile stuff for like open source software. There's a lot of little tricks that you don't know until you start getting into it, and there's no explanation as how to do it until you're familiar with it.
Yes, follow on.
Yeah, please.
How are you benchmarking some of these models?
So I'm kind of deferring to LM-Sys's judgment at this point. They have a leaderboard for whatever the current best AI model is, and I just went to the leaderboard, found the first one that was open source, and clicked download. Yeah, we're not. That's kind of another kettle of fish. There are tools that you can do that. Fast Chat has them built in, but I've basically just been listening to what I find on the internet. Thank you. Those are both really good questions. Yeah.
So with the fast text or fast chat, you said it had like a leaderboard. Are you just getting one of those from Hugging Face, or is it?
So lmsys.org. You can also go to chat.lmsys.org if you want to use a free OpenAI, but they have they have a fast chat instance running, and we're not running it in leaderboard mode, but you can run it in leaderboard mode where you can basically have 2 windows open at the same time, write the same query to both, benchmark their response time, vote on their quality, that sort of thing. And so they have their leaderboards on that page. By the way, has anyone used it? Is it working?
Yeah.
Good. I have literally never had this many people using it at the same time, so I'm really happy it didn't like explode. So that's very nice. That's a nice field test.
It also gave me something I didn't know before.
What'd you say?
I just typed in lorem ipsum, and it told me, oh, that's not just like the first random text. It's actually Latin, or this is an example.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. So the more you know. Oh yeah, it also ends every sentence with indent.io or something. I don't know what that is. I'm still trying to fix that, so apologies.
I kind of wonder if that's either like just for stylistic purposes or if it's so it doesn't answer its own text.
I wonder. I think it's, yeah. I think if I really ripped open the code of it, I could probably fix it by adding an additional case to strip that out. But again, not my job, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Do you have, I'm sure, people at the library who are using this, comparing it to something like
GPT?
OpenAI?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So are there expectations being
Yes.
met with this? Okay.
Oh, no, not being met.
No.
No, sorry. There are expectations. People, so again, so we're still kind of we're on the tail end of it, but the original idea was get it up, get it working, see if anybody even wants it, see if it's useful in its current state. And so that kind of happened a few months back, and people were like, oh yeah, it works, and we're seeing it, but we're gonna need some more time to kind of get used to it. And then as time went along, we'd have these sort of monthly meetings where people were like, oh yeah, I kind of use it for this. And then a couple months later, like, I use it, but I also use GPT. And then a few months later, people are like, it's not GPT. I don't know why I would even use that. So we updated the model that it's using. I updated, I don't know who we is. The model that's using yesterday. I did it ahead of this because anyways, that model was pretty out of date. The model it's using now is Facebook's recently released Llama 3. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have some more comparative responses. But yeah, the thing about GPT, like we're just not in a position where we can compete with GPT in any way, shape, or form in terms of quality of model. They have their models are all trade secrets. We're not even close to them in terms of compute power, in terms of LoRa's, in terms of anything. This is all us very much. I'm trying to think of a good metaphor, but just like we are in a very small fish in a very big pond. Yeah.
Ian, if you don't mind me mentioning.
Please.
So
This is Jeff, by the way.
some of the intent behind this was how does this fit into an organizational unit? In this case, an academic library, how can we use that on the back end and slowly ease everything out? But we've had some people walk into the lab, and one of the use cases was I want to take my scientific research and get maybe retool it so it can be readable by a general audience. And those are the type of people who don't want to put their scientific research into the proprietary systems. And so with the older LLM, I think we had maybe not seen the best results. But
no.
I'm really intrigued to see how people respond to it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's open ended. Even if we don't have this URL open up outside of KC, if you were to just walk in this lab and you're just a random person in town or something, it's open. So that's something where they can at least have kind of a safe sandbox to try things out.
Yeah, please tell your friends and your cohorts about this. It'll only be open for the next few days. But honestly, it would be nice as a stress test because we've never done anything like this before. Yes, question?
Do you believe that this AI that you put together, do you think as a student, do you think you connect it to the archives of books? Can somebody say, where is this book? And then it would return it, or is it just research purposes?
So at present, that's not an option, but we are looking into that. There is I'm not going to be able to say it correctly. So one of the AI librarians brought this to my attention, but effectively there's a way where you can sort of hijack the thinking process of the AI. So you can say, if you hear this very specific question that we already have an answer for, where is this book, right? We have systems in the library that'll tell you the exact row, column, shelf, 3 books from the left kind of thing. But that wouldn't be the AI. At that point, it would be another sort of program or whatever, sort of interjecting and saying, before the AI can respond, here's the answer for you. The AI itself cannot in any way do that. Yeah. But there's a lot of desire for that. We've heard a lot of requests.
I did ask it for journal articles on a specific
Sure.
item, and it said, what's your preferred journal? And I said JSTOR, and so then it gave me titles, so theoretically a student, it doesn't link you to it, but a student could go to JSTOR and say, okay, I'm looking at these 4 articles that were, I think I said in the last couple of years.
Sure. I would be surprised if those are entirely valid.
Okay.
Those could be hallucinated. Well, it will actually provide you links. So if you say I don't know, it'll provide you links. Again, it's word prediction. So it knows it's very common to see www.google.com/question or Q equals. right? But beyond that, the further you get down, the less and less real, I guess, the less and less likely it is to be real. And the more likely it is to be just made up. Because again, it knows what a URL looks like. It does not know what a URL is. But yeah, I would be curious if those were
Should have
valid.
read it.
Sure, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, the amount of time you had to put into this researching and then
Sure.
implementing it, I assume you've got a lot of other responsibilities too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's the balance like? I mean, they have to ask you to prioritizing this over.
You're asking the wrong person.
Right.
I'm not, my work life is not balanced in everything. I'm usually like working really hard on one thing for like 2 weeks and then realizing, oh, I have let all my other responsibilities slip, and then fixing all of those and then coming back. In total, this was like a 4 or 5, maybe 6 month project. And that was what they say is for side projects, you're not supposed to devote any more than like 30% of your time a day. I wasn't following that rule, but if you average it across the 4 months, it was probably, or the 6 months, it was probably only 30% of my time. But again, remember, I'm just one person. And most of that was research time. If you know the tool, if you know you're going to use FastChat and you know the LLM, like for even one person who knows what they're doing, you could set this up in a weekend, probably. Yeah. You guys, if you don't have any more questions, is it okay for you guys to leave early? I'm not gonna, I promise, you're not gonna hurt your feelings, but I'll stay here until the bell rings.
It's asked it for directions to Hale Library.
Sure.
Fortunately, it sent me to the University of Iowa.
Yeah, it'll do that. It'll do that. If you ask it, we asked it about Hale Library, and it was like, Hale Library actually there's 3 libraries. I'm like, hey, that's weirdly correct. Hale Library in Kansas State, Eisenhower Library in Colorado. Nope, not that. Nope. Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.